They called it the Ailing Man. A 600-year-old empire which had flourished by giving economic, religious, and legislative freedom to nearly 30 nations of different creeds and traditions under its reign was now shattering at its foundations. The currents of nationalism had seeped through its borders. It was the 20th century. The Ottomans, who had fallen behind the Western world, both in their economy and military, were being led by young Turks, the forerunners of Turkish nationalism. And it was no accident that individual countries within the Ottoman territory had begun to claim their independence. Hoping to regain the lands they had lost, the Ottomans entered World War I, which resulted in defeat and occupation of their country. The Ottoman territory was divided among the Allies by the signing of the Treaty of Sèvres. People of a country which once ruled the world now lived under occupation. The future looked bleak. Hopes were dim. A small robot bearing a young commander of the defeated army silently passed near the flagship of the occupying navy. The young commander calmly gazed at the flagship and uttered, "They'll go back where they've come from." The robot boarded a small Turkish vessel. Mustafa Kemal, the young commander, boarded the ship named Bandırma. This was the moment when the nation's struggle for independence was triggered. It was the Turkish cavalry entering Izmir which heralded the end of the War of Independence. A legendary struggle of 2 years against death and devastation had ended in victory. The war was over, with the enemy gone back to where they had come from. Yet it was only when Mustafa Kemal and his friends planted the seeds of modernity and democracy on this land that the true legend began. First, the Republic was proclaimed. The country would be governed by the people and not by sultans and caliphs. This was followed by a series of reforms ranging from the alphabet to vestment, from legislation to women's rights, from arts to industry. The people were erecting their own plants and installations, raising among themselves a necessary capital investment for the first banks, and building their own roads and railways. The source of such joy and pride was the new republic. Turkey's hunger for modernity was manifest in its eagerness to readily adopt these reforms. The women worked side by side with the men to build a new republic.
Türk milletinin karakteri yüksektir. Türk milleti çalışkandır. Türk milleti zekidir.
At a time when the horizon was clouded by an oncoming world war, the young generation took over the legacy of the founder of the Republic. Turkey had to enter the Second World War without Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. The new leader, İsmet İnönü, followed Atatürk's guidelines to protect peace in the country and in the world. Turkey remained neutral and unharmed by the war. The end of the Second World War brought about new concepts, new visions, with democracy rising on the one hand, but the aggression of Cold War stepping up on the other. Turkey adapted itself to both without a problem. 1946 heralded the birth of a multi-party democracy in the country. In 1951, Turkey entered NATO. During the Democratic Party government, free enterprise flourished and significant advancements were achieved in modernizing the industry and agriculture. Yet there was democracy in the country, and people wanted to have more and more of it. It got so that they were faced with the first military coup in 1960. Democracy was reinstated in the following years. The primary figure in Turkish politics in the 60s was Prime Minister Süleyman Demirel, who was renowned as the king of dams. Step by step, Turkey industrialized, and for the first time, Turkish products ranging from white goods to cars appeared on the market. When the 1968 wave of freedom reached the shores of Istanbul and fused student demonstrations, the country had to pay the price in the form of another military intervention in 1971. But Turkey had met with democracy and didn't want to part with it. Bülent Ecevit, who with his blue shirt and his party emblem of a white dove symbolized modesty, humility and peace, became the hope of the 70s. But the innocent student demonstrations turned into street riots, which invariably led to massacre and a high death toll. Anarchy and bloodshed was abound. The economy was near collapse. It was then that the country first encountered inflation. Power cuts, scarcity of certain goods, queues made life unbearable. People were hopelessly looking for a savior. The armed forces again took the stage. Khaki color obliterated democracy once again. One of the most prominent figures of the 80s, Kenan Evren, a four-star general, reinstated democracy, but in civilian clothes as president. Turgut Özal, whose party ANAP won a landslide victory in the elections, became the prime minister. While the 60s and the 70s bore the stamp of politics, the 80s were earmarked for economic growth. With an innovative approach, Turgut Özal put an end to bureaucracy, which until then impeded development. With his leadership, Turkey opened up to the world. In a globalizing world, Turkey shed the role of a small self-contained village and decided to integrate with the world. In this new era, Turkey underwent radical changes. New freeways were built, communication systems were renovated. The country became a giant in textile and steel industry. The GAP project, which would totally change the fate of southeastern Anatolia, was started. The government's agenda concentrated on privatization of uneconomical and unproductive state enterprises. European community was considered for economic and political competitiveness. Turkey's strategic importance was enhanced as a gateway to Central Asia. And just as in the initial stages of the young republic, the Turkish people adapted to this great change. Turkish businessmen and exporters pioneered to exploit new frontiers by completing major construction contracts for buildings, dams, and production plants. Turkey now follows closely the global developments not only through its communication satellites, but also with its heart and soul. This is how it has become one of the 20 largest economies in the world. Those who strive to realize the dream of a democratic, modern and industrialized Turkey know very well that we have only reached the start of a long and arduous journey. But we are committed to carry on with an ever-increasing pace for many 75 years to come.